I'm walking down the aisle at my ex's wedding. Excuse me? I blink slowly at the host in front of me, affronted by her sudden question. Mrs. Jenkins, the owner of the bed and breakfast, asked again with a smile that was a bit too knowing for my liking. I said, "Where's your partner? I assumed you'd be coming with your wife or girlfriend." Far from it. I wondered what her expression would be like if I told her why I was there, to attend my ex's wedding, to watch Ethan Sinclair, the absolute love of my life, get married to another man, but there was no way I was going to tell her that. So, instead, I gave a tight-lipped smile. It's just me. Can I see my room? I'm beat. Oh, sure, she giggled like a schoolgirl. I took this moment to take her in. She was a petite woman in her 60s with a head of curly silver hair and sparkling blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. Come in, come in. I've just made a fresh batch of cookies, perfect for taking the edge off, she said, leading me inside. The lobby was cozy, filled with mismatched furniture, antique knickknacks, and the delicious smell of freshly baked cookies mingling with lavender. So, here for the wedding, are you? She asked, handing me a cookie and a cup of tea. Her eyes twinkled with curiosity. Yeah, that's right, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Such a lovely couple, Ethan and Daniel. Though between you and me, I've always thought Ethan had a bit of a wandering heart, she said, raising an eyebrow. Really? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Oh yes, you can always tell when someone's truly happy or just pretending, she said, patting my hand. But enough about that. Let's get you settled into your room. Why would she even say that about a couple getting married in a matter of days? Upstairs, I sank into the bed. My eyes trailed after Mrs. Jenkins as she pulled the windows open, flooding the room with light. Soft quilts surrounded me on the bed, and the now open window offered a beautiful view of the ocean below. I hope you like it. Holler if you need anything, Mrs. Jenkins left me to unpack, trailing her words behind her. Hopefully, I won't have to, I grunted, closing the door with a satisfying click. I stared out the window for a second and let out a long sigh before tugging the curtains closed too. The room fell into thick darkness, just how I liked it. The darkness gave way to alone time with my thoughts, with my memories. I replayed my last conversation with Ethan about a year ago. Both of us were at different places, quite literally and metaphorically. He was rising in his work and I was running after stories as a reporter. Our paths were diverging and we lost each other while moving. Do I need to beg you to love me, Alex? Ethan's voice trembled, his usually calm demeanor beginning to unravel. We stood in his slick penthouse, the city skyline shimmering behind him, a total contrast to the chaos that filled the room due to our argument. It's not about love, Ethan, I groaned, feeling the bitter sting of his words. My heart hurt for him. I wanted to hold him reassuringly, but I can't lie to him or myself anymore. Despite the sickeningly sweet smell it gave off, the relationship between us was starting to rot. You are always away, Alex, chasing after another story. You see me as nothing more than an afterthought. Ethan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. His fists clenched and released at his sides. Well, not everyone gets to inherit Daddy's company. Some of us have to work real jobs, I snapped, sadly admitting my annoyance. It occasionally bothered me that Ethan had everything handed to him, more or less, while I had to work for everything more than I ever let on. Ethan took one step forward, frustration written all over his face. Don't get snarky with me, Alex. I respect your job. My company isn't the reason I feel unloved by you half of the time. Unloved? For the love of God, I'm dating a man that's 6 years younger than me, and it's because I love him. Well, I don't feel it, Ethan screamed, sweeping a stack of books off the table next to him. His big blue eyes shone with tears. I want to be loved by you in a way that makes me feel important in your life. So he wanted me to drop work to love him. I understood his harsh upbringing. His mother died when he was young, and his father was always at the company. He grew up lonely, but I can't be attached to him constantly just because that's his love language. My heart broke at the sight of him. Maybe we're just not right for each other, I said, tasting bitterness from every word. You need a lapdog. I'm not one. What? Ethan was almost shouting. No, please don't say that. Fine, I'll go with you instead. Tears were running down his cheeks, and I felt like the most despicable person on earth seeing him in such a condition. Go with me where? Wherever work takes you. I have a black passport. It'll work out perfectly. I hated myself for even considering it for a second. As a grown man, Ethan would abandon everything to tag along with me. I wasn't stupid enough to agree. He'd hate me eventually. When did our relationship become that unhealthy? We can't continue like this, Ethan. I knew that this was the only right choice. It was the sole option available for both of us. Ethan, I think we need a break. Ethan's knees went weak and he wobbled. Alex, please don't do this. You know better than to suggest a break. There is no such thing as a break, only breakups. His raw vulnerability made my own skin crawl with revulsion, yet simultaneously provoked a desire to hold him tight and tell him everything would be alright, but I couldn't do it. To be honest, his level of devotion scared me. I apologize, Ethan, I can't. With those final words, I turned and walked out of his penthouse. The elevator ride down seemed like an eternity, each floor representing the distance between us that was growing rapidly. It was only after I reached outside did I receive a little relief, as the rain fell hard on my head, giving me the perfect escape to let my pent-up feelings out. Unconsciously, my feet propelled me forward into the rain, leaving behind the doorman's offer to get me an umbrella. I ran until I reached a park, soaked to the bone. There I let loose on a branch for an hour, maybe more. Maybe I just didn't understand love, not the way Ethan did. His definition of love scared me. My memories of that night faded as I found myself staring out the window of the bed and breakfast. The sky had darkened and rain began falling just like it had on that night. The rhythmic patter against the glass was like the tears which had fallen down my cheeks that day. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. I had come here for closure, to support Ethan and find some peace for myself, not to reminisce about the past. Later that evening, I decided to take a walk along the beach before facing the rehearsal dinner. Mrs. Jenkins was all too happy to show me the way. The sand was cool beneath my feet and the sound of the waves was soothing. As I walked, I thought about Ethan and our time together. We had our ups and downs, but there were so many good memories. Was it possible to truly move on from someone who had been such a big part of your life? The rehearsal dinner was the first event on the agenda. As I approached the elegant seaside restaurant, I took a deep breath. "You can do this," I muttered to myself, straightening my tie. The restaurant was a beautiful, old-fashioned building with large windows overlooking the ocean. Inside, the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement. I spotted Ethan almost immediately. He looked good, happy even. My heart did that stupid flip-flop thing it always did when I saw him. He was wearing a well-tailored navy suit that highlighted his athletic build, his blonde hair neatly styled, and his blue eyes sparkling with the same intensity that had always drawn me in. He was talking to a tall, handsome guy who had to be Daniel. Great. Perfectly perfect Daniel. "Alex?" Ethan's voice cut through my thoughts, bringing me back to the present. "Ethan," I replied, forcing a smile. "Congratulations, you look happy." "Thanks. How did you get here?" he asked, sounding almost shocked, and for a moment there was an awkward silence between us. Was the invitation just for courtesy? Is it one of those things where I'm supposed to see it as a sign of him moving on? Of course it was. Stupid me. "So, this must be Daniel," I said, nonchalantly extending my hand. It's not as if I was begging the ground to open up and swallow me, except that it was exactly like that. "Yes, and you must be Alex," Daniel replied, shaking my hand firmly. "Obviously. Ethan just called my name a few seconds ago." I snickered at him in my head, but my eyes were watching his every move. Daniel was the kind of man who looked like he stepped out of a GQ magazine. Dark hair, chiseled jaw, and a confident, almost arrogant air about him. "Ethan's told me a lot about you." "All good, I hope," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "Mostly," Ethan said with a grin, and we all laughed, easing some of the tension. Daniel turned back to Ethan, indulging him in a conversation that made him giggle loudly. I stood awkwardly next to them for a few minutes before excusing myself with the excuse of grabbing a glass of wine. As the night wore on, I mingled with the other guests against my will, people I would have never spoken to if not for this event. I caught up with old friends, made small talk with distant acquaintances, and did my best to avoid any awkward encounters. Ethan's sister Rachel was as skeptical as ever. She had always been protective of Ethan, and our breakup hadn't exactly endeared me to her. She probably hated my guts. "Alex, it's been a while," Rachel said, her tone neutral, but her blue eyes sharp. "Rachel, good to see you," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I was surprised to hear you were coming," she said, raising an eyebrow. "What is the plan?" "Yeah, well, I thought it would be good to support Ethan," I said, not entirely convincingly. "No plan is in the works." "How disappointing," she hissed with a small smirk before walking off, and I couldn't help but wince. Then there was Marcus, Daniel's best man. He was pretentious enough to have his own fan club. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and had an air of superiority that was hard to ignore. If he was like this, I imagined Daniel wouldn't be any better. Or was I just being bitter? "So Alex, what do you do?" Marcus asked, looking down his nose at me. "I'm a journalist," I replied, keeping my tone friendly. "Ah, journalism. The noble pursuit of truth and all that, he said with a hint of sarcasm. Something like that, I forced a smile. You don't get paid much, do you? A sigh escaped my lips, and I analyzed Marcus. Despite his bubble of wealth from afar, the tip of his collar was lightly frayed, and the edges of an intact tag peeked out of his suit sleeve. I walked up to him and pushed the tag out of sight into his sleeve. Instead of worrying about my salary, you should focus more on yourself. Trying to keep up with high society must be stressful. That kept him quiet for a while. Through the small talk and forced smiles, I kept an eye on Ethan. He seemed happy, but there was something in his eyes that didn't quite match the smile on his face. At some point during the party, the lovebirds disappeared, and Marcus made a crass joke about the pre-wedding hump. I couldn't be paid $1 million to like him. I waited for a while, tired of the crowd, but hoping to catch a final glimpse of Ethan before leaving. After 10 minutes of a no-show, I grabbed my coat and headed out. The door jingled as I stepped out into the cool night air. The sounds of the party inside mingled with heated voices towards the parking lot. I paused, considering if it would be too noisy to intervene, but slowly, the voices started sounding familiar. Ethan and Daniel. Daniel, I told you we'd get through this together. Ethan's voice was strained, the tension in his tone palpable. I know, Ethan, but it's not just about us. It's about marriage, our future. I need to know that I can trust you, Daniel replied, frustration lacing his words. You don't trust me? Ethan's voice wavered, a mixture of hurt and anger. It's not that simple. Your doubts, your hesitation, it makes me doubt us. How can we move forward if you're not fully committed? Daniel's tone softened slightly, but the edge remained. I am committed, but this is all happening so fast, I just need time to process everything, Ethan pleaded. Daniel scoffed, hitting his foot on what I presume was a car tire. A day to our wedding is fast. Do you think I didn't see how you looked at him? You freaking invited your ex to our wedding. My heart sped up at the mention of me. How did Ethan look at me? Wait, I didn't. Ethan was curious too. How did I look at him? With love. Do you still love him? Instead of a response, I heard footsteps along with Ethan's voice. I'm not answering that question, Daniel. The footsteps were heading towards me, and I looked around frantically for a place to hide. It'd be devastatingly embarrassing if they bumped into me here. Should I dig a hole in the ground? It was too late for that. Daniel and Ethan were now in front of me. Ethan's cheeks were flushed red, and Daniel looked as if he'd delight in using my face as a punching bag. What are you looking at, brick-face? Daniel hissed, grabbing Ethan by the wrist. I attempted to salvage the situation without backing down. I met Daniel's glare with a cool smile. You know, Daniel, calling me brickface won't change the fact that you're making a scene for literally everyone to see. Get out of my face, Daniel grunted, hitting my shoulder with his as he dragged Ethan back into the restaurant. Smooth, Alex. Real smooth. Wedding day. The next morning, I woke up feeling a mix of anticipation and dread. The sky was ominously cloudy, mirroring my mood. At the grand seaside mansion with a beautiful garden where the ceremony was to take place, everything looked perfect. From the neatly arranged chairs in the garden to the altar that looked way too close to the cliff edge at the end. Too perfect, even. I took my seat at the back, as far away as I could be from their vows. I came for closure, not to assault my heart with a 20-pound baton. As the ceremony began, I watched Ethan walk down the aisle. He looked stunning, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt? Fear? Before I could figure it out, the officiant asked if anyone objected, and right on cue, a storm rolled in. The wind picked up, the sky darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall. I wish Daniel and Ethan were superstitious. If they were, they would take this as a sign to call off the entire thing. Chaos ensued as guests scrambled out of the garden for cover. Marcus was quick to take off his suit jacket and drape it over Daniel's head as they ran into the mansion. There goes his refund. I sure hope he paid for that suit. Ethan remained at the aisle, makeup perfectly done. Chivalry was 6 feet under when it came to Daniel. He ran off with Marcus, leaving Ethan. This wasn't giving me closure in the slightest. Being here and watching Ethan walk into an obviously loveless marriage only made me want to sweep him off his feet and take him far away. I felt a sharp gaze on me, and I turned to my left. Just a few steps away from Ethan, Rachel was watching me with cold eyes underneath a tiny shade. Fed up, I mouthed, "What?" Surprisingly, she mouthed back while pointing at Ethan. "Are you stupid?" Was she trying to help me? Determined, I ran up to Ethan and tugged him toward a side room with shaky wooden doors. Inside, he looked at me with a mixture of relief and confusion. "Alex, I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "And that's totally fine," I reassured, stepping closer. "I feel trapped. I've been trying to convince myself that this is what I want, but I still have feelings for you, he confessed, his eyes searching mine. My heart skipped a beat. Call the marching band. To hell with Daniel, but that would be too selfish. Instead, I tried to reason with him. Ethan, I still love you too. I don't think I ever stopped loving you, but I want you to be happy, truly happy. If that's with Daniel, then so be it. But if it's not, I don't think I want to get married. Just as Ethan was about to call off the wedding, the door burst open and Daniel stormed in, his face dripping wet from the rain outside. He had clearly overheard part of our conversation. Daniel, Ethan started, his voice shaky. Daniel held up a hand, stopping him. Ethan, I need to say something. I've known about your doubts, and I thought we could work through them. I believe that if we got married, everything would fall into place, but I didn't expect you to back down like this. Daniel, Ethan tried to reply, but was stopped again by Daniel. I am in no place to blame you. There's something I have been hiding from you, something you don't know. My business is failing. It's been struggling for months, and I thought this marriage could secure our future, both personally and professionally, Daniel mumbled in one breath. Ethan's eyes widened in shock. What? You never told me that. Daniel's shoulders slumped. I know, and I'm sorry. I was hoping to convince you to merge our companies, with your company and me as CEO. We could stabilize things. I thought if we got married, it would make the merger easier. You wanted to use me to save your company? Ethan's voice cracked with a mix of anger and betrayal. Daniel, how could you? I'm sorry, it just made so much sense, Daniel said, his voice filled with genuine remorse. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I could make it work, for both of us. Ethan held up his hand, shutting him up. Why are you telling me this now? Daniel glared at me in response. Because he just had to show up. Perfect Mr. Alex, right? You never moved on. A smug sense of pleasure crawled through me. Don't bring him into this, Daniel, Ethan snapped. Fine. I heard everything you said before I barged in. I heard it all. You want to call off the wedding, right? I patted Ethan's back for comfort. He wasn't alone. Ethan squared his shoulders. You were right. I never let go of Alex. Agreeing to this wedding was a mistake. I just wanted companionship. I knew it. You were also leading me on, Daniel spat, grasping at straws to make himself feel less like a villain. Before I could think, I stepped forward, fist clenched. You selfish bastard, I shouted, lunging at Daniel. He wanted companionship, and you just wanted to use him. Alex, no, stop it! Ethan grabbed my arm, holding me back. Daniel, with Alex here, I can't continue with this sham. Daniel didn't move, his eyes clouding over with sadness. I do care about you. You were my friend first, before all this. Ethan's grip on my arm tightened, and I can feel his body shaking. Daniel, why didn't you just talk to me? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Because I was scared, Daniel admitted, his voice breaking. Scared of losing you, scared of losing everything I've worked for. I was desperate, and I made a terrible mistake. Ethan's eyes were full of tears, and he looked back and forth between us. I don't know what to do, he whispered. I feel so betrayed. Daniel stepped forward, his expression earnest. I understand if you can't forgive me, Ethan, but I also know I can't marry you under false pretenses. You deserve to be with someone who loves you for you, not for what you can do for them. Not bad. His little speech obviously softened Ethan up. I had a lot to say, but it wasn't my place. Reluctantly, I let Ethan walk towards Daniel, who now looked a mess in his black tux. So, what's next? Now that I've told you everything, no more lies or pretenses, will you still consider getting married to me? Our families, our friends, they're all out there. Hey, I interrupted, wrapping my arm firmly around Ethan's waist. Slow your roll, buddy. His apology was cute, but he had to be on some weird stuff to think I'd watch Ethan get married to him. Watching it the first time almost drove me crazy. Ethan looked into my eyes again, tears falling freely now. He looked at me, then Daniel, and back at me. I made up my mind already. Ethan's choice was obvious, and Daniel's features were etched with sorrow. You don't need to worry about the guests. I'll break the news to them. With that, Daniel turned and left the room, leaving us in a heavy silence. Ethan collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I moved to sit beside him, placing a tentative hand on his back. How do you feel? Like someone just lifted a 10-pound boulder off my chest. With the wedding officially called off, Ethan and I left the venue together, stepping out into the rain. The storm had subsided to a gentle drizzle, and the wet ground shimmered under the streetlights. Ethan looked at me with a glimmer in his eye, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. "Do you remember when we used to run in the rain? Back when we first started dating?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with nostalgia. I nodded, grinning. "Yeah, you always said it made you feel alive, until that night. The night when I broke his heart so bad that even the skies cried for us." "Don't mention it." Ethan took my hand and started running, pulling me along. We splashed through puddles, laughing like kids. The rain soaked us to the bone, but we didn't care. It was freeing, like shedding the weight of the past. Ethan's laughter was infectious, and I couldn't help but join in. He looked younger, more carefree, just like the Ethan I had first met when he took over his father's company. His eyes sparkled and his wet hair clung to his forehead, making him look utterly stunning. Suddenly, he stopped us and turned to me, his chest heaving with excitement. "Alex, do you ever think about us? About what could have been?" "All the time," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you so much, Ethan." He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "If you kiss me now, Alex, you can never ask for a breakup again in this lifetime. Can you promise me that?" My heart pounded in my chest. "I promise, Ethan. I'm never letting you go again." With that, we leaned in and shared a passionate kiss in the rain. It was electric, filled with all the love and longing that had built up over the past year. The world faded away, leaving just the two of us, connected in a way that felt unbreakable. We made our way back to the bed and breakfast, drenched but elated. Mrs. Jenkins was waiting in the foyer, her eyes lighting up when she saw me through the darkness. "Well, well, if it isn't my favorite guest," she exclaimed, assuming it was just me. "Did you hear? The wedding was called off." Ethan and I exchanged a glance, trying to hold back our laughter. "Really? What a surprise," I said, my voice dripping with mock innocence. Mrs. Jenkins continued, oblivious. "I heard it was quite the scandal. Imagine the groom just up and left." Ethan couldn't hold it in any longer and burst out laughing. Mrs. Jenkins turned to him, her eyes widening in shock. "Wait a minute. You're the groom!" I grinned, unable to contain my amusement. "Mrs. Jenkins, meet Ethan, the man I stole from his own wedding." She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Well, I'll be. Alex Reynolds, you rascal, you stole the groom!" Ethan blushed, still giggling. "It's a long story, Mrs. Jenkins." She shook her head, a smile spreading across her face. "Well, you two are soaked to the bone. Get yourselves upstairs, take a hot shower, and come down for some tea. We have a lot to talk about." The next day. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, crisp morning. Ethan and I decided to explore the small town, taking in the quaint charm of the cobblestone streets and the seaside views. We wandered through the market where vendors sold fresh produce, handmade crafts, and local delicacies. Ethan bought a bouquet of wildflowers from a cheerful florist, handing them to me with a shy smile. "For you," he said, his eyes twinkling. I took the flowers, feeling my heart swell with love. "They're beautiful, Ethan. Thank you." We strolled along the beach, the waves gently lapping at our feet. The sun was warm on our faces, and the scent of salt water filled the air. It was peaceful, almost magical. Ethan suddenly stopped and turned to me, his expression serious. "Alex, I want to start over. I want to build a life with you, somewhere we can be happy and free." Tears welled up in my eyes. I want that too, Ethan, more than anything. But I was scared. Would things change once we left the magic of this small town? I'd have to make changes to my life and my work. After enjoying the waves for a while until the sun set, Ethan and I decided to rent bikes for a ride back to the bed and breakfast. The old man agreed immediately after he heard Mrs. Jenkins' name. "Tell her Rusty says howdy," he winked, with a tip of his hat. We soon found out the meaning behind his name. These bikes creaked all the way down the street, but they did the job. We pedaled through the quiet streets, the breeze whipping past us as we laughed and raced each other. Ethan looked over at me, grinning. "Think you can keep up?" I laughed, pushing harder on the pedals. "Oh, it's on, Sinclair." We arrived back at the bed and breakfast, breathless and exhilarated. Mrs. Jenkins was waiting on the porch, a knowing smile on her face. "Well, I thought you eloped again," she teased. I shook my head, still smiling. "Not quite. When are you lovebirds leaving?" Ethan silently parked our bikes, pressing his lips together. "Are you sick of us already, Mrs. Jenkins?" I teased. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head, her eyes twinkling. "Of course not. Before you head back to New York, you should visit the town fair. It's the highlight of the summer. Rides, games, and even a pie-eating contest. You can't miss it." Ethan and I exchanged a glance, both of us thinking the same thing. "We'll go," Ethan said, his voice filled with excitement. It sounds like fun. Anything to put off the inevitable. The next day. The annual town fair was a fun distraction from the inevitable, but we had to talk. As the sun began to set, we found ourselves at the Ferris wheel at the side. The operator grinned at us as we climbed into the car, securing the bar in front of us. The wheel started to turn, lifting us higher and higher into the sky. The view from the top was breathtaking. The whole fair spread out below us, lit up like a magical wonderland. As we reached the top, the Ferris wheel stopped, giving us a moment of stillness. Ethan turned to me, his expression softening. I have to return to New York tomorrow for a meeting. Okay, I nodded, feeling a sense of inevitability. It's time. I also have to get back to work. I pushed 2 stories aside to be here. Aw, for me? Ethan cooed. My cheek heated up and I avoided his gaze. Yeah, for you. We sat there for a moment and the world seemed to pause around us. Ethan reached over, taking my hand. Alex, I know you don't believe in myths, but I heard that if you kiss at the very top of the Ferris wheel, you'll never break up. My heart swelled with emotion. We aren't kids. Ethan giggled with his eyes glistening. I know, however, there is something I want to say before we reach the bottom. I gave him a questioning look. Oh, more folktales? No, he said, his tone becoming serious. About us. About why we broke up. I tensed for a moment as memories came rushing back. All right, then. With a deep breath, Ethan began. I smothered you with love and affection. I thought that if I loved you enough, everything else would fall into place, but I realized now that it was choking. Choking was a strong word, but yeah. I exhaled deeply, running my fingers through my hair. I was also afraid of commitment. Seeing such a desperate need in you terrified me. At the time, I feared I would lose myself. Now Ethan spoke softly. This breakup needed to happen. I understand now that you're not an emotional crutch. I shouldn't be in a relationship just because I'm scared of being alone. My shoulders relaxed slightly, shaking the tension away from them. Not saying that I missed you or anything, I snuck a glance at him and mumbled under my breath, but work was lonely. Everything was lonely without you, Alex. You're a grump, but you're my grump. For a minute, we sat in silence while the Ferris wheel swung back and forth. My throat constricted as I looked at Alex. All our problems could have been solved with simple communication. Yeah, he replied, clutching my hand tighter. We're terrible at that, aren't we? Understatement of the year, I murmured. Ethan's eyes melted as he stared into mine. But look at us now. We both changed for the better. Maybe this time we'll make it work. I felt my lips curl into a smile. You think so? I know so, he whispered, edging closer to me. Alex, I want to be with you, but there is one thing that we must swear not to do anymore. What's that? Anxiety gripped me. I hated and loved how easily he took control of my mood. No more bottling things up, Ethan stated unequivocally. We talk about everything. Okay, I agreed. And no more smothering me with affection, okay? Ethan smiled. Only when you ask for it. This made me laugh again, and it felt as if a load had been lifted from my shoulders for the first time in months. I'll hold you to that. Nothing will change, Ethan said, his voice filled with contentment. I nodded, feeling the same sense of peace. Even if it does, I won't let you go. Never again. I'll hunt you down if you do, he turned to me, his eyes filled with love. Tears welled up in my eyes. You can tie me down to your side if you want to. He leaned in, and we shared another tender kiss, the kind that spoke of new beginnings and endless possibilities. It was soft and sweet. Ethan took my hand. Thank you for coming to the wedding, he said softly. Crashing my wedding was the best decision you've ever made. I'm an invited guest. What do you mean by crashing? I smiled, squeezing his hand. He shook his head in mortification. I didn't invite you. I almost had a heart attack when you showed up at the rehearsal dinner. What? If Ethan didn't send the invite, who did? As we contemplated the possibilities, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from his sister, Rachel. It was short and it read, I almost forgot. You're welcome. Enjoy your honeymoon. She sent the invite. Back in New York, I moved in with Ethan. His place was more comfortable and I didn't want to force him to move into my apartment. Ethan still helped Daniel out with finding new investors for his company, and we kept our promise to each other. I made more time for Ethan even on my busiest days, and he learned to accommodate the hardships of my job. Sometimes I missed his clingy side. Regardless, no matter how far I traveled for work, I always remembered to return home. To him. Love has a way of coming full circle. Sometimes we lose it, not because it wasn't right, but because the timing was wrong. Can you watch the one you love marry someone else? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force. and stay wholesome.